Whether you're a beginner or quite experienced, mistakes can still happen in our bullet journals. That doesn't mean it's time to throw in the towel or that bullet journaling is not for you though. So today we're going to talk about common mistakes when bullet journaling and how to avoid them. Our first mistake is bleed through or ghosting, which is very often complained about in our community. This is when pen from one side of the page seeps through and you can see it on the back side of that page. Bleed through being the more aggressive form of this. To avoid this mistake though, I do encourage you to test all of your new pens in the back of your journal before using them on your regular spreads. This gives you an opportunity to see how the pen reacts to the paper and make a decision as to whether you actually want to use it on the pages of your journal. Sharpies and other alcohol-based markers are particularly aggressive. They will seep through almost all papers, so you might want to keep that in mind when shopping for your future pen purchases. Another common mistake is writing or drawing things in the wrong place. This can be particularly frustrating if you're using a pen because they're not easily movable, so my recommendation here is to pencil things in, even if it's just for spacing, before you go in with the pen. This means you can ensure that things are going to fit properly, you're not going to end up with lettering that looks kind of squashed or a little bit odd, you're not going to accidentally over or underextend your lines, which is a common problem for me. And even though penciling in does add to the time taken, you're saving yourself time because you don't have to try and fix the mistakes, if any were to come up. With penciling in though comes erasing, and with erasing, sometimes we get smudging. This can be particularly devastating if it's on a title or, for instance, the nameplate page in your brand new journal. So if you're going to be erasing in areas that you have pen or ink, make sure that you give things an appropriate amount of time to dry. Or what you could do is try blotting them before you go over with your eraser. I often just use my finger to do blotting, which isn't super absorbent, so I would recommend something like a tissue or another piece of paper. You can also buy proper blotting paper, but you can use other tools to do the same job. Another mistake that might come up is not liking how you've coloured things in. With spreads that we do all of the line work on first in particular, we could really love how the line work looks, but then once it's coloured in, not like it quite as much. This could be because we've added too much colour to the page, or maybe our colour choices weren't quite right. A way to get around this mistake is to photocopy your line work and do a mock version to see how it looks. This gives you the opportunity to decide whether you do actually want to colour it in at all, or whether those colours that you've picked are the right combination. Another error that we can sometimes encounter is things not fitting in our layouts. This could be something like trying to fit another element into our weekly log and it not quite working out, trying to divide the page into a certain number of segments and not actually having enough room for them all, or a bunch of other issues. My recommendation for this is to measure things twice and pencil them in. Measuring twice just gives us that double check moment to ensure that things are actually going to fit the way we want them to. And penciling things in means that we're more likely to draw it in correctly, similar to the mistake we talked about before. What you can also do to help make sure things fit properly is to use something like a spread planner. I have a version of this that's available for my patrons, and it just allows them to mock up layouts before committing pen to paper. One of the things not fitting properly issues that I've encountered previously is when making Dutch doors and accidentally not measuring it wide enough and then cutting the page and having this awkward little stump of a Dutch door. Another issue that you can encounter regarding Dutch doors is cutting the paper too close to the spine edge of the journal, which kind of compromises the journal's structural integrity and can make pages fall out. This is in particular for when you're making horizontal Dutch doors, or ones where you cut across from the edge of the page and then up or down along the spine edge. Rather than cutting super close to the binding and running the risk of things falling out, instead cut a little bit further out from the binding. You still cut the horizontal part all the way to the binding so that your Dutch door swings back and forth nice and easily. But when it comes to cutting off the part that you don't want as the Dutch door, so for me it's this top section, don't cut all the way at the binding. Cut a little bit further out from that, and then stick the extra piece of paper down to the page below it. This way your Dutch door still opens nice and easily, but you don't have to worry about the other side of the paper falling out. A mistake that a lot of newer bullet journalists make, and also some of us more experienced ones when it comes to things like monthly setups or whatnot, is waiting too long to get started by being paralyzed by analysis paralysis. or effectively overthinking the setup to the point where you just don't get started. My recommendation for this is to, rather than trying to set everything up all at once, so for instance setting up the full year or even the full month, my recommendation is to set up month after month and week after week. This gives you an opportunity to review what is and isn't working so that you can make tweaks moving forward. You're effectively treating it like an experiment. So I'll give this layout or this setup a go, and as you'll use it, you give yourself the opportunity to figure out what does or doesn't work for you. You don't need your setup to be 100% perfect for it to be fun or functional or get whatever use you want to get out of it. Another mistake that's quite common is copying things in without thinking it through. This is in particular for layouts or setups that you might see online that aren't actually necessarily going to fit the way you like to plan or what you realistically need. My recommendation for this is to ask yourself how and why questions. Like, how will this layout serve me? How will I use it? Why is it going to be necessary or useful for me? That's not to say that every layout needs to be super functional. Sometimes the function of a layout is just for fun. You could use things like quote pages for lettering practice, mood trackers to practice your doodling, that kind of stuff. One of the biggest mistakes to avoid with bullet journaling though is sucking the fun out of the experience by putting too much pressure on yourself. You are allowed to be a learner. Don't compare your beginning to somebody else's middle. But you know what's actually awesome? Is getting to compare your beginning to your middle. If you stick with bullet journaling, over time you can really easily see the progress you're making. That's something that I did in my video looking at the then 70 monthly journal setups I'd done, which you can find at the top here. Or if you'd rather get some more tips about how to fix mistakes in your journal, then the video at the bottom is where it's at. Click or tap on either of those and I'll see you over there.